If you zoom out far enough on Earth's history, extinction is kinda normal. Species appear, do their thing for a few million years, and then bow out. What's not normal is what we've been doing over the last few thousand years, hitting the fast forward button on that process. When people say animals we made extinct, they're talking about the species that disappeared mostly because of us through hunting, habitat destruction, pollution, invasive species, and more recently, climate change. I can't literally list every single one. There are thousands, many of them small and poorly known, but I can walk through some of the big, famous ones and what their loss did to the ecosystems they held together. Think of this less as a funeral and more as reading the patch notes of a game we've been accidentally modding for 50,000 years. Let's start way back at the end of the last ice age. Wherever humans showed up, North America, South America, Australia, New Zealand, many islands, large animals started vanishing suspiciously soon after. We're talking mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed tooth cats, giant kangaroos, enormous flightless birds, and more. Climate was changing at the same time, so scientists still argue about exactly how much was hunting versus warming, but humans are very high on the suspect list. Those big animals weren't just oversized lawn ornaments, they were ecosystem engineers. They knocked down trees and shrubs. They churned up soil. They spread seeds and nutrients in their dung. They moved nutrients long distances as they migrated. When they disappeared, whole landscapes changed. Parts of the Arctic that used to be grass-dominated mammoth steppe became more shrubby and wooded. In other places, dense forests took over areas that had once been open wood pasture grazed by huge herbivores. Fire patterns shifted. Nutrient cycles slowed down because there were no longer herds hauling fertility from one place to another. So right from the beginning of the human global tour, the pattern is already visible. Remove the big, messy animals, and the entire feel and function of the ecosystem changes. If Earth were a video game, islands would be the levels where everything has low armor and you spawn with a gun. Island animals often evolved with very few predators. They lose fear, lose the ability to fly, sometimes get huge or tiny in strange ways, and then humans show up with rats, pigs, cats, guns, and axes. It's not a fair fight. The mascot of human-caused extinction is, of course, the dodo of Mauritius. It was a big, flightless pigeon that evolved on an island with no mammalian predators. When sailors arrived in the late 1500s, they brought hunting plus rats, pigs, and monkeys. By the late 1600s, the dodo was gone. Ecologically, the dodo was probably a large ground seed eater and seed disperser. It likely swallowed big fruits whole, digested the pulp, and dumped the seeds somewhere else with a nice blob of fertilizer attached. It also would have trampled and disturbed leaf litter. There's a famous story that a tree called the tambalacote could only germinate if its seeds passed through a dodo's gut. That turns out to be oversimplified, but the general idea is right. Dodos were probably one of the main ways some plants moved around the island. After the dodo vanished, those plants lost a major partner and seed dispersal became slower and patchier. Forest structure changed, even if it took a while. The dodo's extinction is like uninstalling one of the island's main seed delivery apps. New Zealand had its own giant flightless birds, the moas. There were several species, some up to 3 meters tall. Indigenous Maori arrived around the 13th century and, over just a few hundred years, hunted every moa species to extinction and burned a lot of their forest habitat. Moas were huge herbivores, browsing on shrubs and trees, trampling seedlings, and spreading seeds in their droppings. Their browsing kept some plants short and encouraged others to grow out of reach. When they disappeared, forest understories changed shape. Some plants that had evolved to handle mall-style browsing suddenly had no browsers. Seed dispersal for large fruits became more limited. And then there's Haast's eagle, a massive eagle that hunted moas. When moas went, the eagle lost its main prey and quickly followed them into extinction. That's a clean example of how losing one species can drag another one down with it. So, in New Zealand, removing those birds meant rewiring the entire food web from the canopy to the soil. We've also been very efficient at making big marine animals disappear. In the Bering Sea, there used to be a giant relative of the manatee called Steller's sea cow. It was about 8–10 meters long, lived in shallow waters, and fed mostly on kelp. It was discovered by Europeans in 1741 and hunted so intensely that it was gone by 1768, about 27 years after we even realized it existed. Sea cows weren't just floating manatee potatoes, they were major kelp pruners. By chomping on kelp, they would have thinned out dense kelp beds, allowed more light to reach other species, created patches and edges in the kelp forest. After they vanished, kelp ecosystems had one less big herbivore. That changes how kelp forests respond to other pressures, like sea urchin outbreaks, climate shifts, and loss of sea otters. It's harder to prove exactly what changed because we wiped them out so fast, but losing a huge herbivore is never a neutral event. The great auk was a large, flightless seabird of the North Atlantic, a bit like a northern penguin. We hunted it for meat, oil, and feathers until the last known individuals were killed in the mid-1800s. Great auks nested in huge, dense colonies on rocky islands. Their presence wasn't just noise and guano, it was a nutrient pump. They ate fish from the sea and then dumped the nutrients on land, fertilizing coastal vegetation and feeding insects and other scavengers. That guano also washed back into shallow waters, boosting productivity there. When the great auk disappeared, those nutrient subsidies collapsed. Other seabirds still move nutrients, but not in the same way or at the same scale. Think of it as deleting one of the main fertilizer factories connecting ocean and land. Now let's head to North America and look at one of the clearest before and after stories, the passenger pigeon. Passenger pigeon, there used to be billions of these birds in eastern North America. Flocks were so large they darkened the sky for hours. We then hunted them relentlessly, destroyed much of their forest habitat, and by 1914 the species was extinct. Passenger pigeons were like flying ecological events. When they settled in a forest to feed and roost, they consumed huge amounts of acorns, chestnuts, and other nuts mass, broke branches and opened gaps in the canopy, dropped enormous amounts of guano, adding nutrients to the soil. That feeding pressure meant some trees never had all their seeds survive. The pigeons acted as population managers. Their roosts probably created a cycle of disturbance and fertilizer that shaped which tree species dominated. After they disappeared, some tree species, especially those that relied partly on seed predation to thin out crowded seedlings, may have changed in abundance. Forest composition shifted, with evidence suggesting changes in the balance of oaks, chestnuts, before chestnut blight, and maples. The pattern of food booms for other wildlife changed. Mass that would have gone into pigeon bellies suddenly fed more rodents and deer. Some ecologists even think the loss of passenger pigeons indirectly contributed to modern problems like tick-borne diseases. More acorns feed more mice and deer, which can support more ticks. It's not as simple as no pigeons equals Lyme disease, but it shows how removing a massive consumer species can ripple into unexpected corners of the ecosystem. Staying in North America, we also managed to eliminate our only native parrot, the Carolina parakeet. It lived in forests and swamps of the eastern and central US, and was driven extinct by habitat loss, hunting, especially as an agricultural pest, and possibly disease. The last known bird died in 1918. Carolina parakeets ate fruits, seeds, including toxic ones like cockleburrs, and probably a lot of insects. As seed eaters and dispersers, they helped move seeds of various plants, including some weedy species, probably influenced which plants spread along river corridors and forest edges, may have helped control certain insect populations by supplementing their diet with bugs. Their disappearance leaves a hole that no other native bird quite fills. Today, some plants that once used parakeets as one of their main seed couriers rely more heavily on mammals or on chance. Again, it's a subtle shift, but ecosystems are built out of lots of subtle shifts. Humans are especially talented at removing top predators because they tend to eat things we like to eat or things we own. The thylacine, or Tasmanian tiger, was a marsupial predator that looked like a strange cross between a dog and a tiger. It lived in Australia and Tasmania. On mainland Australia, it likely disappeared thousands of years ago, partly due to human activity and the arrival of dingoes. In Tasmania, European settlers finished the job with bounties, trapping, and habitat destruction. The last known thylacine died in captivity in 1936. Ecologically, the thylacine was an apex or near apex predator, hunting wallabies, small kangaroos, and other mammals. Remove that top predator, and what usually happens? A trophic cascade. Prey populations, like wallabies and possums, rise. They browse more heavily on vegetation. Young trees and shrubs struggle to regenerate. Meanwhile, introduced predators like foxes and cats move in, hammering smaller native animals. Tasmania today struggles with overbrowsing by herbivores and the impacts of invasive predators on small marsupials. It's not all because of the thylacines loss, but that missing piece at the top of the food web is definitely part of the story. Some of the animals humans erased literally helped build the landscapes we think of as natural. The aurochs was the wild ancestor of domestic cattle, a huge, powerful cow that roamed Europe, Western Asia, and North Africa. We hunted it, converted its habitat to farmland, and by 1627 it was gone. Aurochs were major grazers and browsers. With wild horses and deer, they created a shifting mosaic of open grassland, scrub, and forest. They kept some areas open through grazing and trampling, created muddy wallows used by other species, spread nutrients in dung and urine. Without them, and with wolves and other predators also reduced, Europe's landscapes tilted toward denser forests in some places and heavily simplified farmland in others. The classic European Meadow Lodge Row countryside we romanticize is, in a weird way, a substitute system maintained by domestic livestock standing in for the lost wild herds. The quagga, a partially striped subspecies of zebra from South Africa, was hunted to extinction by the late 1800s. It grazed on the grassy plains and likely helped keep certain shrub species in check and shape grass composition. Its role has been partially taken over by other zebras and livestock, but that original mix of behaviors and genetics is gone. Today, there are backbreeding projects trying to recreate something quagga-like or aurochs-like using domestic animals. That alone tells you how much we suspect those lost grazers mattered. It's not just land and sea. The rivers have their ghosts too. The Baiji, or Yangtze River dolphin, once lived in China's Yangtze River. Industrialization, overfishing, boat traffic, pollution, and dams turned its habitat into an obstacle course of hazards. After a failed survey in 2006, it was declared functionally extinct. The Baiji was a top predator in that river system, feeding on fish. Losing a top predator in water has similar effects to losing one on land. Certain fish species can boom or bust without their natural regulator. The overall size structure of the fish community changes. That cascades down to plankton, algae, and water quality. The Baiji also served as a living indicator of river health. If a big, sensitive mammal could thrive there, you knew the system still had some integrity. Its disappearance is a loud statement. This river has been pushed past the point where some of its highest level species can survive. On islands like the Galapagos and in the Indian Ocean, giant tortoises used to be incredibly common. Sailors loved them because they could be stored alive on ships as walking meat barrels, and they were harvested heavily. Where they've gone extinct or been severely reduced, we've seen direct ecological effects. Tortoises are slow but powerful seed dispersers. They eat fruits, walk a long distance, and drop seeds in nutrient-rich piles. Their grazing keeps some areas open, preventing everything from turning into dense thickets. They trample and dig, creating microhabitats for other species. On islands where tortoises have vanished, some large seeded plants struggle to spread, and vegetation becomes more overgrown and uniform. Conservationists have actually started replacing extinct tortoise species with closely related ones. For example, using Aldabra tortoises on islands where local species are gone to restore that lost ecological function. It's basically hiring a subcontractor to do the job of an extinct species.